Okay, good morning, everyone. Today, I wanted to make a quick video on how you can go about scheduling your Snowflake notebooks on Snowflake directly from Git. Now, I know a lot of you might have already been using Snowflake for creating their notebook workflows, and one of the prior videos we actually created a Snowflake notebook that allows you to fetch an OpenAI key secret, a Snowflake secret into the notebook so you can reach out to OpenAI and get the models and the weights to maybe run some AI applications. Today, I wanted to share how you can automate this process so you don't have to come back and run the Snowflake notebook directly every day. So currently, as it stands, the version 1 of Snowflake Notebooks allows you to do something like this. So it allows you to have a scheduled notebook and you can create a schedule out of that notebook. So currently I don't have permissions to create a schedule of this particular notebook, of course, um, because I don't have access to create tasks. But as we go through this video, I will show you how you can go about creating a task. But not just that, I will also show you how you can use this feature of scheduling the notebooks in a more automated fashion so you can actually clone your repository, the Git repository where you are hosting your Snowflake notebooks every day so that your code that is running in Snowflake is not stale. So you're running your Snowflake notebooks or any IPyYNB notebooks every day with the fresh code. So let's get started. The first thing we will do in this tutorial, so just going over the list of the things that we'll be working on. First, we will create a Snowflake Git repository. So the Snowflake Git repository is nothing but a local, or you can say a Snowflake um, um, repository that stays in Snowflake for you. And it is a clone of your original repository that you must be hosting in GitHub or perhaps Bitbucket. So we'll be creating that GitHub repository clone in Snowflake so that you can use it in Snowflake. For this, we will need a GitHub personal access token or PAT. We'll also need to store the secrets that will allow you to reach to the GitHub or Bitbucket repository to fetch or clone your repository. And those secrets or that personal access token has to be stored in a Snowflake Secret. So we will create that. We already worked on creating secrets and accessing them in notebooks in a prior video. I will share the link in the description so you can reach out to that and learn how to access those secrets that we have done before in this video, for example, for an OpenAI key secret. We will also create an API integration to connect to GitHub. This will be different from the other integrations that we have been working with before in a previous video where we created an external access integration. So we'll learn about that. And then, of course, we will have to create the external access integrations if you haven't done that already for OpenAI or Google Maps. I would highly recommend checking out the previous video because we did all that in that. And then finally, we will create two stored procedures, which will basically run some crude operations for us to clone that repository um, into Snowflake. And then the second procedure will help us run that on schedule using a task. So that's what we'll be doing next. And then finally, we will be using the Snowflake tasks to create um, the scheduled run for for these um, for these stored procedures and Snowflake automation. Now, I understand that Snowflake has recently come up with Snowflake CLI, which is an upgraded version of their previous implementation of CLI, and this is called Snowflake CLI, and you run it using Snow commands. And going forward, if you want to do a full-fledged CI/CD in your workplace, of course, that's the way to go for it. But for data scientists or people who want to just work on the UI side of things, they just want to have everything running here, and they just want to be able to automate their scheduled notebooks through UI without having to go deep into the DevOps principles and everything. This is for those people. So let's get started. The first thing that you will need is a GitHub personal access token. In my case, I already have generated a GitHub personal access token, and I have a repository as well in which I'll be hosting this particular notebook, the demo notebook that we created in the last video today. So here's my repository. You can see I have a Snowflake notebook automation repository. This one does not have my demo notebook yet. We will be doing that as part of the tutorial when I'll push my notebook from Snowflake into this repository. If you don't have a personal access token yet, you can just go over here on your name. You can go to the settings menu here. And then of course you can go to developer settings right here and personal access token. And in this video, I'll be using a classic personal access token, but you can opt for a fine-grained token as well. So go to this and then generate a new token, and you will only need the repo permissions, nothing else fancy. So yeah, try it out. And if you need more help with that, leave a comment and I'll try to make a video on creating a personal access token for GitHub as well. Going back, we'll just need to run this. And of course, for Snowflake, you need to have a context, which basically means that you have to have a Snowflake role that allows you to create. Let's say in this video, we want to create secrets, we want to create API integrations, and we want to create notebooks. So you have to have a role that have those permissions. And also you will need a query warehouse. It's a virtual warehouse, basically a collection of virtual machines, and it's a cluster that allows you to run your workloads. So you need that. Second thing that you'll need is a database. In the previous video, we already created a Snowflake learning database, so check that one out. And then of course you will need a schema. So everything in Snowflake is a database object, so everything lives within a database and a schema, so you need to have those. All of this, the role, the warehouse, the database, and the schema come across and make a Snowflake context. So you need to have the context set in a worksheet on Snowflake first before you can jump on and create any of the things that we are going to create today. So let's say you have all this. So first thing we'll do is we'll run this command. What it is doing is it's a kind of a secret, and it will be a generic password secret. We in the last video checked out the Snowflake secret types. If you haven't, you can actually check this documentation over here where it allows you to create an OAuth secret. You can actually create a cloud provider secret if you want to store, let's say, AWS credentials and how to reach to AWS. You can create that. In this video, we'll be using a basic authentication, which basically is a password authentication. We have a username and we have a password. Password will be our personal access token that we got from GitHub. And then any comments that you want to add to make it more understandable that what the secret is for. In the last video, we checked out how to create a generic secret string to store an OpenAI API key. So check that one out as well if you want. I already have my PAT, but if you have just created your personal access token, enter that here like so. Just copy and paste it over here. And once you have, just run this command. I've already run this command, so I will not run it again. I have my GitHub patch secret already. The second thing that you will need is an API integration. So if I take you to the Snowflake Git integration page, it will show you how to create an API integration for Git. So it looks something like, let me find it out, setting up right over here, and then right here. So you will need this command called create or replace API integration, and you can name your API integration whatever you feel like. You will also need an API provider. In this case, you will need Git HTTPS API. That's the provider from Snowflake itself. So these first two lines will stay as is. And the third, the API allowed prefixes will have to be switched to HTTPS and then example.com and then your account. So in our case, if you're hosting your notebooks or if you're going to host your notebooks on GitHub, you will need API allowed prefixes to be this. And this is nothing but if you go to your GitHub repository, you will find this github.com shub18s over here. So this is your prefix that you want to allow in your API integration. So all it is doing is it's telling Snowflake that we allow this API integration to reach to this particular prefix to fetch something. Another thing that you will need, which I think they don't talk about over here, is they just say enabled equals to true. But if you are using GitHub and you have created an API secret for that, you will need to provide allowed authentication secrets with your secret value in there. This is very necessary because if your API integration tries to reach to GitHub and it is unable to do that, it will actually cause issues for you. And so you will not be able to clone your repository. Let me quickly connect this. So yeah, so what we are doing here is we are just telling it to create an API integration with the provider Git HTTPS API, and we are saying the allowed prefixes are these. And then finally, we are saying the authentication secrets to use for this will be my GitHub patch secret that we created previously. And then we are saying enable this as well. So we will run this. So another thing, you will see that now we have gotten insufficient privileges to operate an account. And if you have been following me on the previous video as well, you know that I have this really a concern for the overall security of my account. So what I do is, if you work in a company, for example, you want to have all your API integrations living in a admin role or an admin database, for example. So you don't want to give access to everyone to create new API integrations, because that way it will become very unmanageable. So what I'll do is I have this account admin role. So this is my personal Snowflake account, so I have account admins as well. In your organizations, for example, you might not have an account admin because someone who has account admin controls how the Snowflake account should be used. So you may want to ask someone in your team to create an API integration for you, or have account admins for a limited period of time um, to create these API integrations so that you can manage which prefixes are allowed as a team in your Snowflake account. And this just goes back to the RBAC, the role-based access control, so you don't create secrets left, right, and center everywhere. So let's create this. And now, as I'm an account admin, I'm able to create a GitHub API integration, as you can see. The next thing will be that I want this API integration to be used by other roles. So I have a Snowflake Learning role. So let's give the Snowflake Learning role the access to use this. Then finally, I will just describe this API integration just to see what it does, what it has. So you can see that it is enabled to true. It has a private link endpoint. No. So the private link endpoints are just, you can think of them as highways that are private to access, let's say, Snowflake to GitHub. But in this case, we'll be using public endpoint. We don't want to use private endpoint because it's not that it's not required for this particular use case. So that's why I have set it to false. Then we have the API provider. Then we have the our allowed prefixes like we had defined. And finally, we don't have any TLS certificates at this point, and we don't have any blocked prefixes as well. Now that being said, let's go ahead and create a repository. So the first part here is what we wanted to reach. So it was about creating a Snowflake Git repository. So let's create a Snowflake Git repository. But before we create a repository, we need to grant the permissions to this role to be able to create repositories. So let's first switch our role to Snowflake Learning role, and then we granted the permission. So now what we're saying is grant create Git repository on schema. So in this schema, which I have already created, I'll show you right here. So this is my dev schema within my Snowflake Learning DB account. I have this. If I go to dev schema, I show you the schema details, and you will see that this one has create Git repository access now after running this command. So this is what we wanted. And finally, now that we have the create Git repository there, we will now create a Git repository. So for the Git repository, it's quite simple. We basically create or replace a Git repository within the DB, the schema, and this will be the name of our Git repository within Snowflake. Now, at this point, you may notice that I'm providing a fully qualified name. What that means is I'm providing a database, I'm providing a schema, and then of course the name of the object of the database that I want to create. You can actually get rid of this database and schema because we have already set the context over here for this particular worksheet. So if you haven't been working with Snowflake for long, this particular context defines what you can run in this particular worksheet. You can change it by saying use database command or use schema command, but that's not really recommended because you have a lot of things. If you have a long worksheet, you're changing the context quite a bit. It's rather easier to just have the context or the fully qualified name right over here. Now in this case, what we are going to do is we're going to say create or replace Git repository, and we're going to create a database, a schema, and then of course the Snowflake notebook automation over here. And then we have the API integration that we created earlier. We'll be providing that API integration. Finally, we'll provide an origin. So where actually is the notebook living? So this API integration only allows the prefixes that are coming from this particular allowed API prefix. Now we need to provide the origin for that particular Git repository. So what we'll do is we'll go over here and we'll just copy this whole thing and provide it in our origin. Now be really now one word of caution is that in the origin you will see that there's S is capital over here, and that's what I copied from this URL over here. When you look back, you will see that in the API integration I actually provided it as it is. So S is capital in my name, Shobaitin S. This is really important because if you have allowed prefixes, let's say with small s over here, and then you are using the origin with a capital S, it will actually not work. It will be rejected. So please make sure that you use the allowed prefixes um, as it is, as you copy them from the URL, and then provide the origin which actually aligns with your allowed prefixes. That's really important. And finally, the Git credentials over here. You need to provide the Git credentials that you created for the PAT from that secret. Now, I previously said that you have to have these allowed authentication secrets. I think you can live without it. If I remove that and create an API integration, I think you still should be able to. I'll recreate the API integration so that it gets the point across. So in this case, I haven't added the GitHub patch secret over here. And I'll describe it again. I don't think it'll show anything different. So that part is done. And then I go back to my role, and then let's add it here. So now I have granted the create Git repository. The final thing that I wanted to actually show you with this is actually this one. So you need your Git credentials in your create or replace Git repository command. So that's where you need to provide the credentials. So let's run this command now. And so it's saying I don't allow this particular secret. Oh, so that's the error that you will find if you didn't allow the authentication secret. So you need both. So let's go back. I'll recreate this API integration using my account admin's role. And then I will apply usage on that. I'll switch back to my Snowflake learning role. And let's go back and try to create this Git repository. And as you will see, now my Git repository is being cloned. I'm using the command called git or replace, but you can actually create if not exists as well, I believe. So you should be able to create it only if the repository doesn't exist. Now that we have created a repository, the first step is complete. And now let's have a look whether we have a repository or not. So in our Git repository, I'll refresh this. In our GitHub repositories, we have the Snowflake Notebook Automation repository. And now that it's loading, it has all the similar contents that I had on my original notebook right over here to be used. Pretty cool, right? And we also have access to different branches over here. The next step is to be able to create external access integrations, for example, OpenAI or Google Maps. In one of my previous videos, when we created the demo notebook that we are going to be using for this demo as well, we actually created the external access integrations. The link is in the bio or in this video description. Just check it out and create an external access integration. It will be very similar to the API integration that we created here. And let's get back once you've done that. Okay, now that you're back, let's create the stored procedures that we'll be using today. So before we go on to the stored procedures, actually, let's go ahead and use our notebook and probably hook up our notebook to this repository. Yeah, so I'll quickly switch here to the notebooks. And this is my previous notebook from my previous video. So if I click on that, once we had created our Git repository, we have access to that Git repository already, right? So in this Snowflake notebook that I have from a month ago, I'm basically just getting the session for this notebook. Everything that runs in Snowflake today for Python is actually a Snowpark container session. So it has a a Snowpark, sorry, backend. So this repository needs a session. Then once it has the session, then we run some SQL commands here to get an OpenAI key. Again, this is a UDF, a user-defined function that we created in the previous video to access a secret. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out again. And we are just fetching that secret here and then displaying. So very simple notebook here that we are going to be using. First thing what we'll do is we'll connect it to a repository. And here I have this Snowflake Learning DB in which my repository object is. And as I selected my database, it was automatically able to search for that repository for me. Once you are on this UI, you can actually change the branches if you have a different branch that your Snowflake notebook lives on. Currently, as it stands, we don't have another branch, and I'm actually going to push this notebook to Snowflake Learning, Snowflake Notebook Automation repository. So let's select this as a folder. And what I'll do is I will just select folder, yeah, and I will add a commit message, adding demo notebook. And then my author name is here. I have my author email, and it's also asking for my personal access token. So at this point, I'll add my personal access token. So now that it is pushing, let's see if it worked. And now it has saved my personal access token as well. So going forward, you will not have to do that. So now here you go. There's a folder called demo notebook in my repository, and within that I have a demo notebook.ipynb. So one thing to note right now is that everything related to notebooks, when you have Snowflake notebooks, for example, is a folder. So your notebooks context is the whole folder context, and you can create something within that notebook context. So now that we have pushed this change, let's have a quick look in our repository to see if the changes are reflected. So if I refresh this, fair enough, we have a demo notebook folder here, and within that demo notebook folder, we have a demo notebook.ipynb. And yeah, we are able to see the contents of that notebook now. Pretty cool. So with this, we have our Snowflake Git repository, and we have our notebook within that Git repository that we want to pull and run it every day. So now let's go to the next part, which is about creating the required stored procedures. So here's the article that I wrote about it a couple of months ago. So what we can do is we can go through this article. If you want to just read through the article, you can do that as well. But I'm just going to copy all of this code that I have over here, which I've already copied. So I'll just leave it at that. Here are the stored procedures that I've copied. Before we go on to creating the stored procedures, we need the permissions to create stored procedures on this schema. So you'll need to run this statement, which says grant create procedure on schema Snowflake Learning DB to this role. Once you have that, then we'll create this stored procedure over here. What this stored procedure is doing, let me quickly walk you through it. So this stored procedure is taking the arguments. These are the parameters of this stored procedure rather. So we have repo name. We provided the repository, the name of the repository where you want to fetch the data from. We have the branch name, from which branch you want to fetch the data from. You have the notebook path within that repository that you want to use. So for our case, we will have demo notebook slash. So it will be inside demo notebook. Then the main file name, the file name of the notebook that you want to use. So in Snowflake universe, you need to provide a main file argument in most of the things. The main file name basically dictates what is the name of the file that you're going to create. You create the Snowflake object using. Then you have something called the target database. So where you want to create this Snowflake notebook in your account. Then the target schema, and then of course you have to provide a target notebook name. So you have to provide a new name for the notebook that you want to create. And then finally, I have this something called an integration list, which if you're working with notebooks, if you're working with any Snowflake or other container services, you basically need to reach out to external services such as OpenAI, for example, in our use case, or you need to reach out to the Google Maps API, or you need to reach out to, I don't know, Zoom call APIs. So you need to provide these integrations that are basically providing you endpoints to reach out to the external world. And so you need to define those early on. We did that in the previous video. And so today we are going to just use that integration list directly in our stored procedure. Then what the stored procedure is actually doing, within that stored procedure, it's basically defining some of the internal variables that it will be using. It will be defining schema name, the command that it will be used to fetch the repo, the notebook identifier, and then some from path and other things. So let me walk you through it. First, it's checking out what the schema name will be. This command is actually unnecessary here because this is just to check whether you are running a prod or a non-prod environment, and you can leverage similar if, else, or case statements within Snowflake stored procedures. So this is just for that, because we'll actually provide the target schema in our parameters for the stored procedure already. Then we have a fetch repo command, which will basically run a CRUD operation called alter git repository, and it will do it on this particular database and schema, and then with the repo name, and then fetch. This command is doing that. And then something really clever that Snowflake has is called execute immediate command. This execute immediate command allows you to run your SQL or your SQL commands essentially really quickly right away. So you can have this as a SQL, for example, this whole worksheet that we have been working on could be a SQL file, and we can just call the execute immediate to run this SQL file. The second thing that we have is something called a create notebook command, and for create notebook command, we will execute this create notebook command. For this create notebook command, we first need to create or replace, we need to create this command using this notebook identifier, which we have created here. So notebook identifier basically means which database, which schema, and what is the target notebook name. All these three things combine to form a target notebook identifier. So I can actually move it over here so you know it better. These things. So it's basically a Snowflake object, and the property of a Snowflake object is that it has a database, it has a schema, and it has a name. That's what defines our notebook. Then we have the from path. So we need to provide it from where do you want to create this notebook from. So once you fetch your repo, it lives and it's cloned as a particular object in one of your schemas. In a professional setting or in a proper RBAC focused team, you usually will have potentially a centralized Git repository store. So you need to provide that location wherever you're cloning your repository. In our case, we are just using our own Snowflake Learning DB and dev schema as the store. So we need to provide that. So from path, we provide the name of the database schema, and then we have the repo name. And within that, we need to provide actually where the notebook lives. So that's the notebook path. So we have the branch and the branch name and notebook path. This, and then you have to provide the query warehouse, in which we'll just use the compute warehouse that I've been using for my work. We have the runtime. This is beyond the discussion of this particular video, because we want to understand the runtimes, either basic runtime or like advanced runtime, in a different video with Snowpark Container Services. So I'll leave it as is. And then we have a compute pool, which can be a CPU compute pool or a GPU compute pool. Whenever you have a right to create a notebook, you are allowed to create two kinds of compute pools. One is, of course, the CPU one, and the other one is the GPU. So we are using CPU for our one. And then, of course, we have the external access integrations, and the parameter that we passed early on will be used here. Finally, we need to provide the main file. So the main file will be the main file name, and then the .ipynb will be its suffix. Main file name in our case will be demo notebook. So we'll be using that. This is what this stored procedure is going to do. It's going to create a new notebook with that create notebook command. And then, of course, with Snowflake, we need to create a live version of that notebook, because this is the CRUD operation that happens behind the scenes as well when you create a new notebook. So you need to alter that notebook and add a live version from the last version that you visited. Otherwise, it will not be live and you won't be able to access it. So this command is crucial for that. And then you execute it immediately. And then finally, you return something saying notebook execution request has been successfully submitted, and check your tasks for the history. So let's run this. So we have the function created successfully. What I'll do is I'll go over here in our database and I'll quickly show you where our function is being created. So Database Explorer, Learning DB, in our dev schema, in our procedures, you see that we have a create notebook stored procedure created right over here. The second thing that we need is a second stored procedure called run notebook stored procedure. All it needs is a database name, a schema name, and a notebook path. Now you can play around with these different parameters that you pass in or create a stored procedure with. All we really need is a notebook path. The dev schema and schema name is just what I created so that I can have access to the database and the schema within my notebook, which is the parameters basically we are passing to the notebook that we want to run. That I can also share as part of a next video. Let me know if you need to know how to access these different variables within a notebook. If not, then of course you can play around with it. There must be some documentation outside that you can leverage. So what I'll be doing in this particular stored procedure is that we're going to create a notebook command. So we're going to create an execute notebook with identifier over here, and then we create a database target schema and schema name, and then we execute that immediately. So let's quickly run this one, and we have another stored procedure run notebook sp, which basically runs our notebook. There'll be some changes that I'll be doing to this when I actually go ahead and use the variables within a notebook. So stay tuned for the next video when I show you how to access different variables within a Snowflake notebook. So now that we have our two procedures ready to go, let's look at the third thing that we wanted to do. We wanted to create the stored procedures, okay. And the third thing is, of course, I missed this three. And the fourth thing that we wanted to do was create the Snowflake task to automate the scheduling of the notebook runs. Before we go on to scheduling with the tasks, let's try and run one of these stored procedures quickly. So actually we can do both of them. So what I need to do is I need to do this create notebook sp. So let's quickly call this stored procedure first. Call stored procedure sp, and let's quickly see what we need from the stored procedure. Yeah. So I'll copy all of this, and hopefully everything will be fine. As a start, I think I can actually copy some of these things from here. So let's call actually this, yeah. So my Git repository is Snowflake Notebook Automation, right? So I'll quickly copy that name from here. Actually copy this and go back. Snowflake Notebook Automation. Then I have my main branch that I'll leave as is. Then I need to provide the path to notebook. So my path to notebook will be demo notebook. That's it. Then my actual notebook name will be demo notebook, and that's an IP by NB file, so I don't need to provide the extension with it. Where I want to create this is within my Snowflake Learning DB. So what I'll say is Snowflake Learning DB, and then I need to provide the schema. I'll just name it the dev schema. I can actually provide it a prod schema as well, so it will create an prod schema because it's running in prod. So let's try prod schema for now. But I haven't provided the. So before I do this, I will need to run another command, which is grant create notebook on schema. I have the permission to create notebooks in dev schema, but not in prod schema. So let's change that. And now I have that access as well. So make sure you do that before you change the schema, or you have a different location in Snowflake where you want to create an object. It's highly recommended because it will fail otherwise. So prod schema, and then I'll actually name my new notebook file. So every time it clones the new notebook, I don't want to keep it differentiated from the original notebook. So let's name it demo notebook auto. So it's automated. And then of course I need some integrations here. So I created an integration in my last video. So let's quickly use that integration. So that integration was OpenAI integration. So let's see if I can use that one. Right. And this is the integration that I have. This is the procedure. So let's see if it is able to create a new notebook. It is saying the branch I cannot find. in one of the positions. So let's see, the main branch, it's not able to find, I guess. Let's see what we named our branch. It's main. The good thing about this is that you can actually do a lot more with Snowflake by just debugging it. So I'll quickly go to my query history over here. And if I see my command that failed here on the create notebook SP on the stored procedure, and if I check the query profile, it won't show me much perhaps. So it just says that you can't find the branch, invalid identifier branch. So we have this branch name, and then we have branch mentioned somewhere. Let me quickly check which branch it is talking about. So we have this create notebook SP, and it's asking for the branch. This particular identifier, which it calls branch, it actually hasn't been defined anywhere. So what we'll do is we'll need to use that somehow. What we can do is we need to use branch name. So I think this will be the branch name. So if I redefine this and then run it, now it's running successfully, I think. Okay, good. So what problem it was facing was that we have a, oh, there's another error. System basic runtime property runtime name. Let's quickly check something out. If I go to notebooks and then create a new notebook here myself, I'll see I have runtimes for container. So it's actually system compute pool CPU is the ML runtime CPU 1.0 is the one that I'm allowed to use, I believe. So it's actually crying about the fact that so I will look, see. Maybe we need to work with GPU runtimes. So let's quickly change that. GPU runtime, will that work? Okay. So we'll have to research more on that, I guess. Let's have a look. I'll pause this video here to just have a look what is happening behind the scenes and see what we can do about it. So what is happening is basically it will work with the basic runtime. Oh, this kind of made me feel like I'm doing something wrong. But if I go back here, um, we will need the basic runtime. Like I said, I don't want to go into this GPU world just yet. So we'll keep it at basic runtime. And then what was happening was when I have the system basic runtime, I actually have a space over here, which is not recommended. So it didn't recognize a system $basic runtime space. So I think this should work now. So let's quickly have a look. One thing I really like about Snowflake or working with Snowflake is that you have a lot of query history build up as you run each and every query. And so you can debug I guess, the queries that you're running really easily. And so the similar thing goes for your procedures or your tasks. So you're easily able to identify the issues that might be running in your commands. So we have the notebook exposition submitted successfully, as you can see. So if everything has went correctly, we should be able to see our new notebook in our database now that was cloned from the Git repository. So let's quickly go and check. We created the new notebook in prod schema, showing nothing here. Let's refresh. It has been created. Actually, this is for now Database Explorer, and they made some changes, so you're not able to see notebooks here. So I'm so sorry that I'm showing you here. Let's go to notebooks and I guess refresh this page if we can. So once I refreshed, you can see that I am able to see demo notebook auto here. And this notebook is not shown in the actual data catalog for some reason because they have changed this UI now. So it's not part of that. But rest assured, the demo notebook auto is here. And if I click on this, you should be able to see the database and schema. The objects are not shown here, but I believe if you go to the schema like that, perhaps it shows. No. So it doesn't show notebooks in the actual UI of Database Explorer, which is a shame, but rest assured our demo notebook auto is created over here. Now that we have the demo notebook auto, let's go ahead and try to run this notebook. So we have the Snowflake Learning DB as our database. We'll run it using our run notebook stored procedure. And like I told you before, the database name and schema name are immaterial to the usage within this stored procedure because we are not really using them. All we need is notebook path to run this. We can have a different name for DB name or schema because these are basically acting as arguments that we are passing to the notebook. In a future video, of course, I'll show you how to change it to pass any number of arguments. But for now, for this particular stored procedure, like we have written it, let's keep it as is. Let me push it using the prod schema. And then, of course, I need to provide the notebook path. So this will be the whole fully qualified name for the notebook that we're going to run. And in our case, we have this Snowflake Learning DB. Prod schema is where we created the new notebook, and the name of the notebook was Demo Notebook Auto. So let's quickly run this. And as you can see, it's running the query right now. And behind the scenes, it's actually running our stored procedure. So in the query history, if I refresh this, you can see that it has called our run notebook SP. This is what we called. It has created a new command called execute notebook identifier, and it is just running that command for us. So if I go to the demo notebook auto now, and over here in the schedule, you can actually check out the run history. So I click on that, and you can see that the manual run is actually happening as we speak. You can't actually see the results as of now for the version 1 of the Snowflake notebooks, but hopefully they will enable this feature so we can see the output of the notebook as the notebook is running. In the meantime, I think I can clean up some of the things that we were doing over here. Oh, it's taking a long time. So we don't need demo notebook auto. Click here, see the run history. It's still running. And Okay, that's a big one over here, the error that it threw. Um, I wonder what it is. Maybe it's about telemetry. I'll actually have a look at my demo notebook. It has failed, of course, and we can check the results. Nothing to fret here because it's trying to get some secret value that we defined in a previous video, and it's not able to do that, which is fine. At this point, we wanted to check whether our notebook is able to run or not. So what I'll do is I'll create this get OpenAI key again to see if I can have this OpenAI API key that we are accessing within the notebook. Perhaps I deleted that key or that key is not working, but the 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 thing remains that we are able to run our notebook from the OpenAI key. Now this is very anticlimactic because I was not hoping this to happen. Um, but rest assured, if you are able to run this notebook and this these things using the worksheet that I was showing you, and then that should be it. So basically, we were able to run our Snowflake notebook automation. So we were able to create the notebook from Git, and then run the notebook using Git. The final task that remains is about creating the tasks. So what we'll do is we'll create a task called create OpenAI notebook task. And what we'll do is we'll provide it with our create notebook SP procedure as a call. So we have this call, and then all we need is this. I'll remove this extra comments over here, which we don't need anymore. And what it is doing is it's basically saying create a task on the warehouse compute warehouse and schedule it using the cron, which is basically 9 a.m. every day Australia Sydney time. And what the task will actually do is basically it will call create notebook SP. So let's quickly run this. Now at this point, again, I have insufficient privileges to run this or create a task in dev schema. So what I'll do is I'll take this command that we did earlier to provide access to create procedures, and I'll provide this access over here. So grant create tasks on schema this, and now that I run this command, let's see what happens. Oh, it's create task, I believe, and it's done. And then I create a task which is created successfully now. And then finally, we need to take the call run notebook SP as well, and we add this over here as the next command. So again, what it's doing is creating or replacing a task called run OpenAI notebook task. And this task will also use warehouse compute warehouse, but this task will run after our create OpenAI notebook task. So it's running one after the other. So we don't need to provide a schedule here. We just tell it like once the first task is over, once you have done cloning the notebook from the Git, you can now run the notebook. And then we are providing it all the things that we had said earlier. So I'll just click that. And there we go. Now it's done. So every time this task runs, currently it's scheduled to run at 9 o'clock, but every time this task runs, this task, the second task will follow through. Let's go ahead and check these tasks quickly. So if I go to my projects, catalog.explorer, learning DB, dev schema, and then I have these tasks over here. I have this create OpenAI notebook task. If I click on that, you can see that this task is created. Similarly, run OpenAI notebook task is also being created. The last thing that we want to do is actually enable these tasks. So by default, when you create a task in Snowflake, it is not enabled. So we need to enable it either using this over here called resume in the UI on the Snowsite UI. So we'll have to do it for both, or you can do it as a command that I mentioned over here. So all the task, let's see if it is able to do that. So we basically, it can't do everything together. So we have to first create notebook task as resume, and then second, it's saying root task is not suspended. Okay. So let's suspend this first. I think we need to create, or there's a first suspend this and then resume the second one, and then resumed, and then you resume the first one, I believe. And there we go. So if we go over here, so I guess I'll switch this from here. So we need to first resume the second task that needs the first task. So I go over here, and if I refresh this page, now I can see this task has been resumed, and so is this one. So if I look at the graph for the task history, you can see there are two tasks, one after the other it will run, and we should be able to run these tasks. Now for the completeness of this video, I really want to know if my notebook actually successfully runs. So I'll debug the functions for a bit and then come back to you and show you the full run. All right, so there were a couple of errors that we were facing in the previous video because of the tasks, because of the access integrations that we created in the previous video from this. The issue that I was facing primarily was due to the OpenAI integration that I had created in the demo notebook in the accessing secrets in your notebooks video. So essentially, I was not able to access the OpenAI integration for some reason in that notebook. So I had to explicitly use that command again to grant usage on the integration, OpenAI integration, to the Snowflake learning role. So I did that. But before going forward with any of the work that we did originally in the demo notebook, for this particular video, we actually created these tasks that essentially create a new notebook in the prod schema. All of the worksheet that we are working on right now is actually in dev schema, and our tasks are defined in dev schema, but these tasks that are defined in dev schema, they're actually creating a notebook in the prod schema. As such, they don't have all the access to all the objects that live in dev schema, and those objects as being your functions that you have defined. So for this particular demo, we had created this get OpenAI key function from our previous video, of course. And this function has to be called within the prod schema when we create the notebooks within prod schema. So how do we access that? Currently in the notebook that we had from the previous video, which we have right here, it exists within the dev schema. So if I open this, originally we had it as get OpenAI key, and it was working fine because we actually were running this notebook in dev schema, and it was accessing the function in dev schema. But since we are going to be running it using task, and the notebooks that will be created by the task will be created in the prod. Once we have domain name, we need to have a fully qualified domain name here. So that would be Snowflake Learning DB dot dev schema dot get OpenAI key. So this is what needs to be there. I've already pushed this change with the fully qualified name over here. So the next step would be to run our tasks. But just before we run our tasks, I'll quickly show you the OpenAI integration that we have provided first. So if you go over here in the notebook settings, in our original notebook, we actually do not have the OpenAI integration enabled. However, when we start to clone this and we start to use our stored procedures approach, our stored procedures are built in a way that they will actually enable this OpenAI integration for the notebook that is cloned by them. So if I open that, you will see that the OpenAI integration is enabled by default because for our stored procedure, we provided the OpenAI integration in the integration list. So without much further ado, um, let's walk to the last part, which is about the running tasks. So originally you would have seen, so those are the two errors that I told you already. One was about the OpenAI integration, and second was about accessing that OpenAI integration within the notebook with a fully qualified name. Um, On to the third thing that is required before we run our tasks is first, of course, we resume the tasks. But before resuming the tasks, or rather after resuming the tasks, we also need to provide the Snowflake learning role, the role that is going to be used to run these tasks, because we are defining these tasks within using Snowflake learning role. We need to provide that role enough privileges to be able to operate on tasks, execute tasks, and also use our warehouse, the compute warehouse, which we'll be using for running these stored procedures. So quickly, I'll run those three commands. So basically it says grant operate on all. So you will see it has um, executed successfully, and it has affected two objects, the Snowflake Learning DB, and it has provided the operate on all tasks within the Snowflake Learning DB to Snowflake Learning role. Then we'll also provided the task execution privileges to operate on account to role Snowflake Learning role. And finally, we'll provide it the grant usage on warehouse of compute warehouse, which we have been using for our Snowflake tasks to this Snowflake Learning role as well. Now, with these three steps taken care of, let's quickly go to our tasks now. I'll refresh this page just to check that everything is in order before running them. So we have Snowflake Notebook Automation, the repository that we'll be using. The main branch is what we are using here. We're using the demo notebook, so it lives inside the demo notebook folder in our repository. It is called demo notebook itself, .ipynb file. We don't have to mention .ipynb. We want to create a new notebook from that notebook definition called demo notebook auto, and this will be created within Snowflake Learning DB within prod schema, and it will have the OpenAI integration as the access integration. The second task is our run OpenAI notebook task, and this task will do just take that notebook, which is living in Snowflake Learning DB, prod schema, and demo notebook auto is its name, and it will run that notebook and pass in these two parameters, which we'll see in the next following video on how to access them. That's all. And let's quickly check if this task has been resumed. Yes, it has. That's why we suspend over here. Both tasks are resumed. So we go to our run history. Sorry, actually, we go to our graph. I'll quickly trigger this create OpenAI task, and it is scheduled to run now. And if we check, we are seeing that this is starting to execute now. Now let's wait for a while before it finishes. And then, oh, it has actually finished quite quickly. So you can see that it has actually succeeded now. Going on to the next task, which is scheduled to run right after the first task. So we can see that that task is now executing. So our demo notebook auto, if we go to that notebook now, if I see the run history, you'll see that that notebook is now running currently 24 seconds. So let's wait while this notebook runs through, and hopefully it will pass this time. It's taking a bit of longer time than my previous runs. Hopefully everything has passed so far. All right, there we go. Our notebook seems to have executed successfully. So let's have a look at our notebook run. And there we go. we were able to get our active session. We were able to successfully access our get OpenAI key user-defined function, which enables us to access any secret within our Snowflake. And then, of course, we have our OpenAI's key right over here. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments, and thank you so much for watching.